Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the Rike Thor 7. Absolutely wild aesthetic. If you're familiar with Rike, this is going to be par for the course. If you're not, this is going to look really crazy to you. In fact, usually the knee-jerk response to stuff like this is, here, say it with me. Let's do it in unison. That looks like a gas station knife. Ah, beautiful, all together. Yeah, the difference here is that this is actually made super well. And you know the difference if you've been around for a bit, right? But if you're newer, sometimes it's really hard to determine the difference between something that is made very, very well and looks similar to something that you might see in a literal gas station. Hint, those are unoriginal designs. It's hard to tell the difference between the real thing and the cheap thing. But Rike sometimes likes to make really wild aesthetics, and they kind of take on the appearance of something prehistoric or something out of the Alien movies, right? This has some really nice materials, including carbon fiber. We have 154 cm for the blade, and we actually have a titanium. It's almost like a jacket bolster. That's the best way I can describe it. But the fit and finish is spectacular. No surprise there, with Rike being the OEM. A lot of people pointed out to me that right after I unboxed this, they were gone from the retailers, and the only place you could get it was on the Rike website, where it seemed to go up $50. Somebody else pointed out to me that Rike seems to have had that price there from the beginning, and that the prices from the retailers didn't change. I was unable to confirm that up until recently. Right before this video, actually, I looked on Blade HQ, and sure enough, you can get this on Blade HQ, at least while it's in stock, for, I think it's $157. So Rike, I don't know why you guys are pricing yourselves like 50 higher than everybody else, but you should not do that. But yeah, I would suggest that you pick this up on one of the retailers that carry it. I'll link it down below on Blade HQ. You guys can check it out if you want. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. We're going to talk all about this absolutely wild design here, but first, let's go ahead and get a measurement. Overall length coming in at, obviously this is the Rike Thor 7, so this is the 7th variation of it, right? But anyways, overall length is actually a lot bigger than you might have expected. It looks like a knife that's not huge, and it actually feels like a knife that's not huge because of its lightweight, but it comes in at about 8.15, maybe 8.2 inches, not quite 8 1/4. Overall blade length is about 3.6, and your cutting edge is 3.5 inches. So really nice, and really a crazy lightweight knife, considering it is what I would consider to be full size. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons. Any custom scales you find in this section can be found down in the description under Original Goat and others. So up against the 8010 and the that's not the 8020.5, the 8020.5. So nowhere near as robust as the 8010, but approaching the overall length, definitely longer than something like the 8020.5. How about up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3, closer to the size of the PM2 with way more cutting edge. And then finally up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case the Ritter Hogue, and now the Hogue Deca. How's the action? Really nice. The action is spectacular. This is the type of thing that throws people off. If you are new and you're wondering, like, how do you determine the difference between the really nice stuff and the stuff that's like low quality, right? It's actually incredibly easy. I'll tell you. The stuff that's low quality is low quality. It's crap. It's not designed well. It has usually a terrible detent, a poorly thought out deployment mechanism. It has crap steel. It's usually painted black with flames or like masks of the Joker on it. I don't understand what that is. The flaming 8-ball stuff, right? That's hot camel trash is what I like to refer. And it's obvious. You pick it up and you compare it to something that's actually made well and thought out correctly. You can literally feel the difference immediately. It doesn't take a knife reviewer such as myself. Literally anybody can pick up something like this and something that is actually from behind the counter of the Glug and Slug or wherever you get your, your pistachios and your terrible knives, right? Yeah, like you can pick them up and feel immediately. It is that obvious, right? But also learning about the different materials that you would see on a nicer knife versus a cheap knife, right? There's a lot of plastic and a lot of mystery steel on cheap knives, right? There's also a lot of shiny, what eventually ends up as being paint that just flakes away, right? So your coatings on your more expensive stuff is going to be much more premium. It's going to hold up better. Your steel, believe it or not, steel comes in thousands and thousands of different compositions, right? But your steel is going to be a much higher quality steel in terms of the composition, right? The composition is generally going to be geared towards the realistic user, right? Despite what the aesthetic of this might suggest, the composition of 154 cm, for example, is an incredible composition in terms of, when it comes down to a utilitarian blade, right? Materials that you can expect to see on, knives that are serious range from inexpensive materials like injection mold plastics, G10, micarta, all the way up to, your carbon fibers, your exotic carbon fibers, your zirconium, your titanium Damascus. I mean, there's an incredible variety of things that you might see. But once you familiarize yourself with that stuff, it's much easier to determine that, right? But anyways, what we're going to talk about here is the action. So much like what I was describing in terms of action, like quality action, what you look for is a properly tuned detent, and then the positioning of the flipper tab and its size and how you would interact with it. All these things coordinate to allow for a satisfactory, convenient, and comfortable break of the detent and a complete deployment, right? Basically, it's a lot of syllables, a very complicated way to say, knife feel good when blade come out, right? That's about it. It's pretty simple. This knife has that. This is usually the case with Rike knives in general. Access to the lock bar right here, it's actually cut out on the show side scale slightly lower than the area that the lock bar itself, right? Which it does have a little scallop, a nice comfortable scallop. Move that out of the way with your thumb. The flipper tab will drop down to your thumbnail, and the detent ball is already well up on the face of the blade, so no double clutch, as we put it. Really, really nice, very smooth. It's not an enormous blade, but almost completely and totally falls shut. We have this rounded flipper tab with a little bit of jimping, a little traction there. You can comfortably push button this, and you can also very comfortably light switch it. It's exactly what you'd ask for in a knife like this. You can also use the rib cage, I guess, to reverse flick it, because underneath this spine or rib cage or whatever you want to call this, is actually a ledge that works really well for reverse flicking it. This goes all the way down. So wherever it is that you like to do that, you just find that spot and do it. You can also thumb flick it if you want to. You kind of have to dig at it a little bit, but you can do that if you want to. So the action's really good. Carry profile, thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. It's contoured. So let's look like this. It is definitely slightly thicker than the Para 3, but contoured with ribs. There's a lot of like bones and things sort of sticking out of this design. Length and height up against the PM2 and the Para 3. Length and height up against the PM2 and Para 3. Lengthwise, definitely longer than something like the Para 3. Approaching the same height considering the flipper tab. It's definitely a little shorter than the PM2. So weight, because we have this, we had an interesting construction here. You have two pieces of carbon fiber that come together at a seam, and then you have this sort of jacket bolster of titanium. They give you access to the pivot the same way that they would like, an integral. But the way you take it apart is really simple. It looks like it would be complicated, but it's essentially just the pivot and these body screws that come off, and then the whole thing comes apart, right? And it runs, of course, on bearings. But yeah, it's not a complicated design. It just looks complicated, and it's neat that Rike is able to do that. Let's go ahead and weigh it. Some materials: titanium, carbon fiber, 154 cm. And then a little tiny cartridge liner. I'll show you guys, I guess, from back here. That is this actually? No, I'm sorry. It's not a cartridge liner. It's literally the shell. So the only steel internally is going to be the lock bar. And actually, the lock bar itself is not steel. It is titanium which is not a necessary thing to do, but they have done it and it's worth pointing out. The lock bar is titanium. We have a steel lock bar insert attached to the titanium lock bar, which is that little bit poking out right there. Nice touch. So we have steel on steel contact, which, if you're new, is important for increasing the total life of the lock bar. Steel on steel between the steel lock face and the steel face of the blade, the locking face of the blade. Titanium on steel, the titanium is going to wear faster, so that's why we do that. 3.1 ounces, really great ratios, and the balance is spot on the pivot. This knife just feels like such a more compact object than it is. I mean, a much smaller object in the best way. It's really, really lightweight. 3.1 ounces of weight for 3.5 inches of blade. It's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and get out my tools for a hardware check. As per usual, my tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use in this channel. All of these body screws are going to be T6. I'm not even going to check them. I can just tell. But the pivot is going to be let's get it in there. There we go. A T8. So that's fine. Actually, those are real tiny. Rike, are you getting weird and trying to give us a T5? T5 should be banned. Like, what? Why? Like, what is the optimal thing to hold together with T5 screws? It's so dumb. Now they're T6, thank God. Why T5 or smaller even exists, I don't know. Nothing that I care about. I'm sure there's a reasoning for it, right? Probably maybe watch parts or something. I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason. I'm just joking. Bunch of, not really even a bunch of T6. You have 1, 2, 3, yeah, because this screw is going to be for the lock bar. So really not much, right? Once you're in there, not anything super complicated or unsurprising. So as long as you have the right tools for the job, you should be good to go. Let's measure the blade stock thickness, which is going to be a little tricky because it's different. I think the best, yeah, so this is where we want to grab it, about right there, to get an accurate measurement on the flat. Stupid, weird, designy stuff. I actually really like the design, to be honest. 133 thousandths, roughly. So right there, about middle of the road. Okay. So this is Richard Wu, I'm sure. I'm sure it says. No, it doesn't. But anyways, if you've looked at his work, you know, in the past, like with the Alien and the other stuff, like it's his design language, right? But what's cool about this knife is that you're getting something really wild and designy, made with premium materials. But because the blade steel is 154 cm instead of M390 or whatever, you're getting it for like $75 to $100 less than what it would normally be priced at. The only really the weirdest elements here are the ribs, I guess, on the carbon fiber, which are actually pretty smooth. I mean, there's nothing. If anything, they actually add a little bit of traction to what would otherwise be an incredibly smooth surface, right? You have these little bones up here, these kind of like ridges back of this sort of fantasy spine thing, and it looks cool, but admittedly, it doesn't create for a comfortable lock-in. This is actually pretty irritating to the finger. It does not feel good. So wearing gloves or something, well, yeah, you'll get a little more traction off of it. But bare finger, I would just avoid it. It's really not comfortable. So it's one of those things where if you're okay with trading what would, is normally an area where you're going to add jimping so that you can lock in and complement the index finger position, you're just not going to have that here. It's just straight up not comfortable. A little harpoon notch there, slightly more comfortable than back here, right? But this is all pretty much just for looks, right? It's all pretty smooth, and there's not really any room for anything to really get trapped in there. Like if it gets in there, it's just going to fall back out by itself, right? This is kind of it's not as matte as like a true bead blasting, but whatever it is they're blasting with whatever they're blasting this blade with results in a very smooth surface, right? 154 cm, not going to win any awards for edge retention. It's fairly similar to VG10, but it has great overall balance. Definitely reasonable edge retention. Very, very easy to touch up. It is a stainless steel, and it's definitely pretty darn tough. I mean, when you consider other similar steels, right? The end result is that it makes for a great and very purposeful user steel. So I actually applaud when companies use this steel to bring the price of a build down by $50 to $100, because then you feel like you're still getting something appropriate and just not having to pay nearly as much money. Still a pricey object, but not as much. The tip, actually the blade shape outside of this, if you can imagine with me, you remove this part and then just imagine this as like not ribbed. You have a very basic and pretty standard modern tactical folding knife. Really, the only bothersome spot is just this. Outside of that, it's fine. I mean, you have good ergonomic lines. The comfort's okay. This area right here is bumpy. Like they decided to, for some reason, like add these bumps that coordinate with these lines right here. Now, I don't know why they decided to do that, because that I noticed that and it's just weird. It's not like, oh my gosh, I can't hold on to it, it's super uncomfortable. It's just kind of a weird choice. So the lock-in is fine. Comfort, it's okay. B minus, right? It's fine. Not the most comfortable thing ever, but I'm okay. Pocket clip is a little long, in my opinion. Pocket clips don't need to be that long. A lot of people think that the longer the clip, the more secure it is in your pocket. Not really, because the total amount of material that is clipping the knife to your pocket is usually going to be about the same, right? So that's what's responsible for it. The only difference would be the total depth. So it would take an incredibly specific circumstance to demonstrate the benefit of having a clip that is longer in relationship to the handle, right? Where that is specifically serving you in the case of not losing your knife. I find that to be a funny argument. The reason that I don't like long clips, right, for the 1 in a million times that the longer clip is actually going to result in you not losing your knife, 1 in a million's got to be, I'm not even exaggerating, that's got to be freaking accurate. The difference is that the longer clip creates for less comfort when it takes up so much of the handle, right? I mean, this is the space you have for your hand. So that clip being elongated means I'm feeling it all the way up to here. In my experience, a clip that's shorter, way back from the 50% line, results in substantially increased comfort. I will easily trade off. I'll trade off the small percentage of increased likeliness to lose the knife, theoretically. Reddit. Theoretically. I'll trade that for comfort. 100 times out of 100 times. 100 times out of 100 times. Feeling saucy today. So yeah, I don't know why the clip's so long, but it's not bad, right? I mean, it's milled and it's soft around the edges, right? It doesn't have like a weird Loch Ness Monster bill, sorry. It's fine. Definitely, a lot of extra designiness without sacrificing too much in the way of meaningful utility outside of this area right here. That's really going to bother you guys. I promise you. Like the way that they did the pivot collar and the Rike logo on the pivot. They always do the cursive. For some reason, they absolutely have to put the name of this knife on the knife. I think that's silly. They shouldn't have to do that. And then it has the number in the series. These are numbered. And then 154 cm right there, which I think is fine. I just don't like the Thor 7 on there. Little tiny, boy, really? Is that the lanyard hole? No, that's the peg for the pocket clip. So it looks like it's actually something I overlooked. Let's look on the inside here. You can see here there's another screw right. Let me get the flashlight back off it a little bit. Right there. Trying to screw in the inside. I saw this hole right here, and I thought, what on earth? That's clearly meant for the screw to engage with the pocket clip, which appears to be nested on this side, but perhaps I'm just wrong about that. It might be that it's nested on one side and not the other, but this clip is, it looks like it's meant to be moved, like able to be moved over for lefty carry, and that hole there is not a lanyard hole, which would be a stupid place to put a lanyard, because the blade would just chop your lanyard up, right? So that clip likely can be flipped over and just apparently just rest right on top of this. And then you've got, that's why you would need 2 screws to hold it in place. 1 screw is not going to be enough. Otherwise you get the windshield wiper pocket clip. Nobody wants that. The seam connecting the carbon fiber makes it look like an integral, which is really cool. I like this, especially when it's done nice. When it's done crappy and you can see the seam or you got one piece of material above another piece, right? Another factor that will determine what quality of item you're looking at is when the pieces don't line up. And the reason pieces don't line up is because the people making the stuff don't care, right? But in the, when we're talking about Rike, they do care, right? So your transition of materials, right? When you're going from titanium to the pivot collar or whatever, right? When there are transitional lines, things meet up in a really nice and pleasing way, right? In a way that attracts knife enthusiasts. People who are willing to spend substantially more money for elements that don't matter all that much when it comes to utility, right? The ironies of the knife world. Oh my gosh, we could make an episode just on that. But yeah, this is gonna be a little bumpy in and out of the pocket. That was my experience carrying it. Is you are kind of feeling all of those bumps, even though the bill of the clip is really just interacting with one of them. Like as you pull it in and out of your pocket, you kind of feel that. A couple of times I was slipping off of it because it was like pinching onto like the material, kind of going up and down over these bumps, and it was like pinching more or less depending on the surface it was going over. So it's a strange thing to experience, but it does happen. So just be aware of that. Steel lock bar insert, but you don't need the over travel. It doesn't have to service that because the over travel is the lock bar is literally behind the material there. You have a stop pin located in its traditional position. Let's take a look at this. This stop pin is not a stop pin. It's actually the material of the jacket, right? It's part of the jacket, which is cool. It's just a flat surface of titanium that the back of the blade interacts with. Kind of neat. Just milled this one piece of material there to fit. Kind of cool. Runs on bearings, no blade play, up, down, left to right, no lock stick, no double clutch. I'm going to be honest with you, there's a little bit of pivot lash here. A little tiny bit. That's surprising. I've never experienced that on Rike before. It is incredibly subtle. Whenever I talk about this, whenever I find it, people ask me, like, does that matter? Like, is the pivot lash going to affect the knife over time? And the answer is no. The only reason I check for it is because I like finding out that the tolerances between the pivot itself, the pivot barrel, and the hole that's carved in the blade, I like knowing that the tolerances are absolutely perfect. You wouldn't feel any movement whatsoever here. I do feel a tiny little bit. It's not going to affect the knife over time. Just pointing out what I'm experiencing. Nice detent, honestly. And then we have close to perfect center. It could be because I'm flipping it over and over again. You know what? No, that's freaking dead center. Look at the tip and the seam there. That's perfect. So, no detent lash either. If you can pick this knife up for, it's either 154 or 157. Yeah, I think it's cool, but you have to be okay with the kind of fantasy theme here, which is on purpose, right? Rike knows how to add these elements and still make the knife functional. So rest assured, the knife is not delicate. These are made with the same materials that you would expect to see in the upper tiers of the production knife world, right? The only elements here, that are embellishment is this area here and this area here. But outside of that, it is a nice utilitarian design. They did a good combination here. They also managed to get it down, at least by retailer pricing, to a reasonable price point. I have no problem with that one. Would I pay the 200 and whatever on Rike's website? Absolutely not. Don't do that's crazy. It's not a $200 knife. But 150, 155? Yeah, all day. No problem. You have to be okay with these elements or prefer these elements, though. But, I feel like the vast majority of people are not going to want this sort of alien dinosaur theme on their knife. But it is cool, and it is very, very Rike, right? So, there you go. It's going to be for some people, but definitely not for everybody. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.